All right, Pacific Rim enthusiasts, the importance of facing, both as a kaiju player and a Jaeger player, and how this is something that is unique to Pacific Rim and also unique to a certain subset of war games. So if you're new to the game, this is something that you want to keep in mind. This is a point that we want to keep in mind without jumping into specific factions or specific individual pieces, because these are the base mechanics of the game. Now, most modern war games, and Pacific Rim is a modern war game. It was built up from the ground up. It's not a legacy system. It's not, say, just pulling in other parallels like Warhammer 40,000, which is very much the DNA, the engine, the under the hood is very much from the 80s that they've just built on and on and on. And while there are new innovations, they're held to the legacy. The concepts of Pacific Rim are built from the ground up. But there's some interesting aspects that you don't see in a lot of newer war games that you did see in older war games. And the term that I use is heroic facing. Heroic facing is this idea that your unit, let's say it's a squad of infantry, it visually represents something on the table. That's physically where the unit occupies space on the table in terms of range, in terms of strength, in terms of attackability. It really doesn't matter the direction the models are facing. So if all of my infantry are facing forward and a tank moves up from behind, I can still shoot your tank. It's this idea of 360 heroic positioning. It's not an exact science for firing arcs or where it is. You know, classic example, if I have an artillery piece facing forward, I could easily shoot something from behind. I'm not necessarily checking out measuring from the barrel of the gun. Facing, especially if it's hex-based, and Pacific Rim is a hex-based game, doesn't utilize the table to measure the hexes, but the pieces themselves and the movement ruler and the ability to turn and face. This is a hex-based game. This is pulling from older gaming systems. Facing is key. Facing is critical. Now, it would be easy to say, well, that's like an old, outdated concept. Why did they pull it in? I believe they pulled it in because, again, Pacific Rim being built from the ground up, there's this idea, okay, we've got this cool stuff in the movies. We've got these massive machines, whether they're mechanical or biological, they move, the dexterity that they have is tremendous, but they're still very, very ponderous. They're in a, I'm trying to capture the description, they're slow in a fast way, or they're fast in a slow way, how they move. There's a lot of mass and momentum behind them based on that physical size. So if we see how they fight in the movies, there is facing. There is this idea of being very ponderous. You capture that on the tabletop through hex-based. Physically, where are you facing? Physically, how do you occupy? When you move, you can't just like move over to the side. If you're not facing that way, you have to turn that way. You have to expend positioning and facing. We also see this idea, the weaponry is fantastic, is apocalyptic with the kaijus and with the Jaegers. So if you get bashed from behind, that's a huge deal. If you're out of facing, that's a huge deal. So how do we capture the movie and build it up into the game? Well, through facing, through hexes. So from that perspective, the first thing we want to realize tactically is, if you are not facing in the right direction, that will eventually cost you the game. It will put you at a disadvantage based on the dice, that if there's a dice breakthrough, you're really going to get punished for it. And the two examples that we see are shooting. Are you in the firing arc? And certainly you can, but then that might open you up to attacks in other areas. And we're going to kind of look at a scenario in a second, because the impulse dice is very, very important. And especially how the game takes advantage of this nature that it's a back and forth combat. It's not necessarily a you go, I go type fight. This idea also, if you get caught in the wrong facing and I get to attack you from behind, whatever it's going to be, there's consequences to that. Facing where hopefully I don't get caught like this. If I've got my piece walking up the center of the board and you've got a unit to the left and you've got a unit to the right, if I choose to face and fully engage one, I'm giving my back to another. I don't want to do that. But I might be in a situation where you have a kaiju that's really, really wounded. You're just leaking kaiju blood everywhere. And you've also got, you burrowed up. You're also on my right side, fully healed up. That's a huge tactical choice. Now, heroic facing, I don't have to make that choice. Okay, I just shoot at the wounded one. If I don't kill you, I can still engage the other one. Tactically facing to represent these ponderous machines, well, okay, look, if I turn to face the wounded and I kill it, great. But if I can't, now I have to deal with it next turn. But also now my blind side is literally to this other monster on the table. So there's a lot of tactical choices with facing. On a side note, this is where things kind of change a little bit. And I can't speak for every scenario because, of course, the scenarios, the rules, the models. But generally speaking, heroic facing systems, you want to dominate the center of the table. Because I can radiate out 360 degrees movement, 360 degrees circle, put your unit in the center, rotate that circle, that projection, measure out movement, attack, psychic powers, whatever it's going to be. And that's tactically the best place to be because I can engage a variety of things. Hex-based, I don't know if you always want to be in the center of the table. It's better to be on the sides because at least if I'm on the sides, I can protect the refused flank, right? I can protect that side. If I'm walking up the left side of the table, physically the left side of the table protects me. I can have my facing ahead or more towards the right, or I can bank out at the last second. Now, that's not always possible because of game mechanics and mission mechanics and terrain, but things kind of change when you have different facings. Facing is also key, where the game is not you go, I go, right? We see older game designs, again, like Warhammer 40K, where you move all your toys and I kind of hang out, then I move my toys and you hang out. And there might be a couple of little interrupts. But the idea of the impulse die, I love it. I love the concept. I love it when it works. I hate it when it doesn't work. But I love this innovative part of the game. It's your turn to go. You get to see how many you activate, if you activate at all. And it represents the chaos. It represents the flow of the battle. Now, okay, as a player, I understand good tactics, but I want tabletop glory. I want tabletop immortality. I feel like as a wargamer, if I accrue enough tabletop glory and enough opponents praise that glory and that name, the gods themselves from Mount Olympus will see that and raise me to tabletop immortality. So I take risks all the time. You know, if this was D&D, old school AD&D, I'd be chaotic neutral. Like, we'll do this. So if there's a chance for tabletop glory, I'll do this. So sometimes you're playing Pacific Rim and you say to yourself, I've got two pieces moving forward and I could play safe. I could play conservative and back up a little bit because next round, if the impulse die doesn't go, even though it's in my favor, if it doesn't and I don't activate, I could be in trouble. Or I could say, look, I'm just going to run up there and smash you because I have the momentum with the impulse die and it's my turn. But if I commit all in and it doesn't work out next turn, you seize the momentum, then I'm in trouble, or I could be in trouble. I'll always go for it because I want that tabletop glory. But these are the tactical decisions where facing is important, but facing based on the dynamic allocation of the game of how the rounds play out or could potentially play out. And that's before we even get into how many pieces are you playing per side, different synergies, different abilities. You have to be extra careful of facing because if things don't activate, you could be in even worse trouble. And this leads to a very, very dynamic and very, very exciting game. So I loop this back in where if you're an experienced wargamer and you've been playing for a while, you understand, okay, cool, it's a hex-based game. It's dynamic activation with interrupts. So I got to be really, really focused on where my piece is facing. If you're new to the game and your background is heroic facing systems, then you need to understand, like, look, the quickest way to get the win and get the glory and to make sure I make as few mistakes as possible, pay attention, focus on the facing of your units.